Hey everybody, welcome back. It's been a little while since I've uploaded any videos, but we're getting close to the launch of Diablo 4, and I thought it was a good time to jump into making some new content. Today we're going to be talking about the build I will be playing on launch, which is the hardcore, passive, no active skill, Thorns Barbarian build. And you did hear me correctly. Once I get beyond the tutorial and get my first Thorns damage, I will have no skills on my bar whatsoever. I'm going to be relying completely on Thorns damage and whatever aspects I can get on my gear. I do plan on participating in the race to level 100 in hardcore, and will also hopefully be the world first passive barbarian level 100. So let's jump into the talent builder and take a look. Because this is a passive build, the active skills, well, it's not just passive, it's no active skill barbarian build whatsoever. So there are some skills that could technically be considered passive, like let's say Iron Skin, because it's not a skill that does any damage. It's just kind of a self-cast ability. I won't be having any active skills whatsoever, so we're going to be skipping all of those, and we're only going to be going for the passives. We do have to do some things to get to where we need to be, though, so we're going to be taking a few points in. I'm just going to do Frenzy. This will help us get through the tutorial area. That gets us to the next stage. But as you can see, most of it is active skills, and the only two passives here aren't really that helpful. One is a lucky hit ability, which only triggers when you are auto-attacking. So since I won't be attacking anything, it doesn't do me any good. And the other one is basic skills generate fury when using two-handed weapons. So again, I won't be using two-handed weapons. I won't be using any weapons. So that doesn't do us any good. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and put another 3 points into Frenzy just to buff that up a little bit. And then the first thing we're going to take is Thorns. Now, as you can see in the builder, this is at level 7. So I think technically this is still in the range of the tutorial or the starting area. The prologue, I think they call it. So that's good for us. We can start a little bit early. It gives us thorns, 10 thorns per level, and then bonus maximum life for the bonus maximum life that you have. And then the next thing we have is increase your thorns by 3%. When enemies hit you, they take additional 10% of your thorns as bleeding damage over 5 seconds. This actually, it goes up to 9%, but it's really not that helpful. The thorns itself is helpful, but the bleeding damage isn't that helpful. But there are some things that we can do with bleeding damage depending on the aspects that we get in our gear. So I'm going to go ahead and take that. And then, of course, we want as much life as possible because we won't have really much as far as defensive skills go. No shouts or anything like that. And then damage reduction against elites, which goes up to 9%, which is pretty nice. Then we're going to be looking at the next area. This little area right here to the left is mostly just for shouts, which normally you would get as a barbarian, but because I don't have any shouts, it is useless. Also, movement speed is mostly useless because we're just going to be pretty much standing still, but I'm going to take it anyways because it does give us something useful, which is the reduction of control impairing effects. That is actually going to be super important. A lot of the mobs in the game can chain CC you or CC you for a long period of time. And because we don't have any of those defensive skills up front, you know, we're going to take a little bit more damage. The next thing we want to look at is this purple area down here for passives. But as you can see, that these are all things that happen while we're berserking. And we actually don't have a way of triggering berserking because we don't have any active skills. So we're going to go ahead and skip those two. The next thing we're going to look at is Pit Fighter, which you deal X amount of damage increase to close enemies, and you gain distant damage reduction, which is amazing for us. All of our damage is going to be pretty much close range because of the fact that it's Thorns. Slaying Strike, you deal X increased damage against injured enemies. We'll go ahead and take that just because we've got some extra points. Now, we don't really have a way to trigger vulnerability that I know of. So we're going to go ahead and skip these two passives right here. Crit chance against immobilized, stunned, or slowed enemies can be useful because of a passive that we get a little bit later. So we'll go ahead and put 3 points into that. Your bleeding affects slow enemies. Now, again, we don't have any abilities that cause bleed, but we are going to get a passive later on that causes any of our damage to become a bleed or a percentage bleed. So pretty much anything that hits us and gets Thorns damage is going to be automatically bleeding. And that will trigger this No Mercy passive. And your bleeding effects deal X increased damage to vulnerable enemies. Although we can't trigger it ourselves, you know, we are going to have extra points. So maybe if we're in a group at like, you know, an event or something, we can just get a little bit of extra damage there. Each time you take direct damage here, Thick Skin, you gain 1.2 base life as Fortify. Now this is super helpful. We're going to be sitting and basically getting smacked in the face the whole time. So this will help us, you know, minimize the amount of damage we're taking. And while you have Fortify over 50% of your maximum life, you deal 12% increased damage. So we're going to go ahead and take that as well. And then the increased damage reduction while fortified by an additional 6%. So that will help us a little bit passively to reduce our damage. The next area is going to be the Ultimates area, which is for the most part not that useful. We don't need attack speed. We're not going to be swinging anything. Two-handed weapons, not really that useful. Overpowers, I don't think Thorns can trigger overpower damage. And we're not going to be swinging any two-handed weapons either. Not swinging bludgeoning, and don't have any lucky strike skills. So the next thing is increase your maximum fury. Now, it doesn't really help us specifically because we're not spending any fury, but it does unlock a couple of other things. Each time you swap weapons, we don't need that. This is the one that we want, though. Heal for 9% of your maximum life for each 100 fury spent. Now, we're going to talk a little bit later about a weapon that you can get. It is a unique, but it causes you to drain fury over time. So that's going to give us a little nice extra little heal for fury that is spent. And then the last passive abilities, Berserker, we don't have that, so we're not going to do anything with that. Dealing direct damage, we're not dealing any direct damage. We're not using any core skills, so this doesn't help us any. But Gushing Wounds, we do get some use out of. It says when causing an enemy to bleed, You have a chance equal to your critical strike chance to increase the bleed amount by 100% of your critical strike damage bonus. Overpowering a bleeding enemy creates an explosion that inflicts 11% bleeding damage over 5 seconds. Now, I'm not sure if damage over time can overpower, so that last part might not be that useful. But we will be having random critical strike chance and critical strike damage on gear just because of the fact that it's impossible to get perfect gear at all times. So we're going to go ahead and take that. And now, as you can see, that puts us at level 50 with plus 7 points for the renown skills and 3 points left over. You can change this a little bit. If you wanted to use the other points, I could put some points into Iron Skin if I wanted to, just for that extra barrier. But I am going to go for the harder challenge and not use any abilities at all. So that's that. Now the gear and the skills, it's difficult to know exactly what the best thing will be, but I did go ahead and look through each one of these and tried to pick the best one for each slot. We're going to start off though with this needle flare aspect. I went ahead and put that on the two-hander because this is going to be our bread and butter damage ability that we basically absolutely need in order to clear the game. Thorns damage dealt has a 20 to 40% chance to deal damage to all enemies around you. So we're going to be stacking thorns as much as possible. We're going to be getting hit by a bunch of different mobs, and all of that thorns damage is going to be splashing out in a radius that's pretty much almost the size of the screen, or at least half of it. So we definitely need that progress campaign in Kyrgyzstan to unlock. Now that is a little bit further into the game, but we're going to be rushing that as soon as possible. I'll talk a little bit about the gems before we go back to the other skills. Our weapon gem, we're definitely going to want to either use skulls, which is life on kill, or let's see what we got here. That's pretty much it. I mean, you could use amethysts for some more bleed damage, but the bleed damage is pretty on the low side. So skulls is basically your only option there. For armor, we're going to want to put emeralds in everything. That gives us flat thorns damage. That is basically all of our damage. So it's going to be, rolls on the actual armor pieces, and then emerald gems in them. And then maybe at some point later, there might be a unique or something that has, more thorns damage on it. And then for jewelry, you have a choice between 8% resistance to all elements, or you can also go for skulls, which adds more armor. Or if you need to buff up a specific resistance, you can get more on one of the other elemental gems. The only technique that works with this build is going to be the two-handed sword technique, which is the bleed one. 20% of direct damage you deal is inflicted as bleeding damage over 5 seconds. You deal 30% increased bleeding damage for 5 seconds after killing an enemy. So the first part of that, since we're not dealing any direct damage, I'm not sure if the needle flare aspect is considered to deal direct damage. I think it's just thorns damage, so I don't think that works. But at rank 10, it does buff the bleeding damage a little bit, so that's pretty much the only one that we can choose. Now, For the gear, we went for the the Shaco, which pretty much everybody's going to be using this in their build. I don't know how hard it's going to be to find, but it is definitely the best helm slot for pretty much every build. The maximum life, cooldown reduction, doesn't really help us much, but crafting material find, that's nice. All stats, that's nice for our Paragon board. But the big thing is the up to 20 damage reduction and +4 ranks in all skills. Now, I'm unsure 100% whether or not the +4 to all skills applies to passives. I have heard that it is only for regular, activatable skills. So I may reconsider that if it doesn't help us. But the other stuff is so nice that maybe it's the best in slot anyways. The next is the aspect of disobedience. You gain 0.25 to 0.50% increased armor for 4 seconds when you deal any form of damage whatsoever. So Thorns should work, stacking up to 50%. So that is a huge buff. Obviously, 50% extra armor just for getting hit. That's going to be amazing for our build. A looting aspect. Become injured while crowd control grants you unstoppable for 4 seconds. This effect lasts or has a cooldown of 40 to 20 seconds. On this piece, I think that means that it would be a 40%. But that just helps us kind of get out of things that we forget to dodge. For the pants, I went with the Temerity unique. Your potion grants movement speed, which is okay, but it doesn't help us that much. But it does give you potion charges, potion drop rate, and potions are going to be like the only thing that keeps us alive, so that's amazing. The lucky hit doesn't matter at all. The healing is cool, but the effect that is when you heal beyond 100% life, you're granted a barrier up to 80% of your life that lasts for 8 seconds. So like, let's say if I'm at 100% health or 99% health and I hit that potion button, I'm going to get a barrier from that potion, which is amazing, especially, in instances where I'm going to need to be spamming them a lot. The next is Ghostwalker aspect. While unstoppable for 4 seconds after, you gain up to 25% increased movement speed and can move freely through enemies. Now, the movement speed isn't super important, but the moving freely through enemies is going to be super important, because if we're surrounded by mobs and we get to the point where we're going to be, dying because of them, then it's going to be nice to be able to run through them so, we don't accidentally end our run early. The needle flare aspect, again, I put that on the two-hander because it's a double effectiveness. For the one-hander, though, distant enemies have 8% chance to be stunned for 2 seconds. When they hit you, you deal 40% increased damage to stunned enemies. So not only does it give us the chance to lower our damage from ranged attackers, but it increases our damage against them, and Thorns does work against range in this game, unlike Diablo 2. And on top of that, I think there was also an interaction with stunned and bleeding enemies, but I can't think of it off the top of my head, so we'll go ahead and move on. Aspect of the Crowded Sage. Now, this is our main sustain aspect. You heal for X life per second for each close enemy up to X life per second. Now, I don't know what the maximum on that is, but I put this on the amulet because it's a 50% extra strength of the aspect, and we want to definitely maximize that so we don't have to spam potions the whole time just to stay alive. The Skull Breakers aspect. Stunning a bleeding enemy deals 22 to 40% of their total bleeding amount to them as physical damage. This is actually what we were just talking about. So if a ranged enemy hits us, they get instantly bled. And then if we trigger a stun on that target, then on top of the bleeding damage and the thorns damage, they get an extra 40% of that damage as physical damage dealt to them. So that's pretty nice. Starlight Aspect. Gain 10 to 20% of your primary resource for every 25% of life that you heal. So we're going to be not only regenerating a bunch of life. Now, I don't know if regeneration is considered a heal or not, but if not, then we have, potions, and then we have other effects that heal us from previous aspects. So that's just a nice little extra bump in our fury generation. That can help us with the weapon that we're going to be talking about in a little bit. The aspect of inner calm, that's on my other, that's on my two-hander sword. Deal 5 to 10% increased damage for each second you stand still, up to 30%. So I think 30% is... I think 30% is fixed, so we may actually swap that out for something else. Just because I think it might be a waste on the two-hander. But it is important to have it because we're going to be standing in the middle of events and other things waiting for mobs to kill themselves. We're going to want to have that 30% damage buff up at all times. And then the Ramaladni's Magnum Opus. So it's not just for your socketing anymore, your cube socketing. The amazing thing about this is not the damage that you get from using it with skills, but you lose 2 fury every second. So 2 fury every second lost, that gives us a way to spend fury without using actual skills. So every, 50 seconds, we're going to get that extra boost in a heal. So that's kind of, not super great, but we're just trying to layer those defensive heals as much as possible, because especially when we get into later difficulties, it's going to be a little bit rough. Now, the Paragon, I'm not actually going to be talking about that much. We actually kind of took a look at things. I thought originally that strength might be buffing Thorns damage, but the way that it's worded makes me think that maybe it's not. Because here it says, it increases your armor and it increases the skill damage. So I don't think Thorns is considered skill damage. So stacking strength doesn't help us a whole lot, except for, increasing our armor maybe a little bit. But I think with armor specifically, you kind of hit that diminishing return and it's not that useful. Dexterity increases the dodge chance and the critical strike chance. Now, dodge chance, I may try to add more stuff that has dodge in it later, depending on if, I'm taking too much damage. But ultimately, we don't want to dodge attacks. We want them to connect with us because the Thorns damage, I think, only goes off whenever a monster hits you. Now, the critical strike chance, Thorns, I don't believe can crit, but, because of the aspect that we added earlier, or the passive that we added earlier, the critical strike chance may be a slight benefit. Now, intelligence ends up actually being probably our best stat. It increases the resistance to all elements. Now, the actual amount that you get from intelligence is not a whole lot. But when you look at the other stats, it's kind of, probably the best one that you can get. The other option would be willpower, which improves the healing received. So that may help us stay a little bit more healthy. but the overpower damage isn't super useful. And the Fury generation, we actually don't probably need, just because we're not spending it fast enough to need that extra generation. So mainly when you're choosing Paragon points, you're probably just going to want to get whatever you need to get to the nodes that you want. So like, you know, let's say you want this 10% physical damage, 4% life node. You just go there, you know, as fast as you can just to get it. Now, obviously, you know, these are tempting as well. 2% life, 2% life, 5% physical damage. But all these, you know, extra nodes here, the only reason why you would want these nodes is for your glyph socket. And the glyph socket's going to be your primary, you know, your primary way of increasing your damage, increasing your survivability. But I don't have a specific build for this passive barbarian. Probably what I'm going to be doing is just getting whatever glyphs I come across as soon as possible. Whatever gives me the, you know, whatever gives me the most immediate benefit, putting those in there, and then choosing whatever I need to activate it within the radius. So, you know, like let's just say we went for Blood Feeder for whatever reason. And by the way, if you want to look at all the stats for this stuff, the guys at Maxroll did put together like a really nice spreadsheet for it. You can check out the Discord and ask around about that, or go to maxroll.gg and take a look. I think they have it posted there, but I don't have it up right now, so you're just going to have to look for it. But like I said, Blood Feeder, you put that in there. For every 5 dexterity purchase within range, you deal 1.5% increased damage. And that's also at level 1. They do level up later. So, you know, if you put that in there, Blood Feeder, let's say you get dexterity, you know, armor, whatever, dexterity, and this is probably terrible for dexterity because it's a barbarian board. So probably not the best idea, but I'll leave everybody else to speculate about that. And that's pretty much all I have for this build. We will be making a video when the actual game launches, so you guys can follow along with my progress and hopefully not die. But until then, thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.